I'm sure everyone has used their phone or a website for something financial, paying a bill, checking a balance, sending money to a friend. It's so seamless now that we barely think about it. But behind that interaction are hundreds of moving parts: security checks, regulations, networks, and technologies all working together to make that experience feel instant. Today, we're going to talk about what it really takes to make money move effortlessly around the world and how product design plays a crucial role in making the complex feel simple. Joining me is Paul Unterberg, Chief Product Officer at Uphold, a platform connecting traditional finance with the world of crypto and blockchain. Paul, really excited to dig into this episode with you today. How are you doing?
I'm pumped. I'm hyped to be on the episode and excited to talk about what's going on in this exciting world.
Awesome. So, to give our listeners just a little bit more context before we really get into things, can you describe what Uphold is building in one sentence or give me that quick elevator pitch?
Yeah, Uphold is building a platform to connect traditional software companies into the world of cryptocurrency. And so we do that through banks, we do that through financial brokerages, we do that through the social media companies that already are building chat platforms, but we make it easy for them to adapt their experience and get more benefits from blockchains.
Awesome. And you specifically, when friends or family ask what you do, assuming not everyone you know is in tech or finance, how do you explain your role in a way that people can understand what you do day
Yeah,
to day?
it's always funny because, I'll talk to my mom and she'll be like, "What do you do again?" And, product management is one of those things that, it's a relatively new discipline, right? I don't think there were a lot of product managers, in maybe my parents' time. So, I like to think about it as the product management is the general contractor. We're not the ones who are actually doing the designs. We have product designers for that. We're not the ones who are actually doing the plumbing or doing the electrical. We have engineers and architects and people who are doing those things. But ultimately, we are accountable for delivering the thing that the customer is going to experience day to day. And that's the role of product is really to coordinate all of these different disciplines to make sure that we are delivering the thing for the customer that they want and what they want and why they want to use it.
I've been in product for a while. I'm not even sure if my family knows exactly what I do. But thank you. That's a great intro uh, and great segue into what we're going to be talking about today. So, on those same lines, I'd like to continue and take a step back and unpack what fintech actually is and why these technologies matter for everyday users. I think fintech is one of those words that everyone's heard of, but they don't necessarily know everything it actually entails. So why don't we start there? For someone new to fintech, can you kind of describe it and explain it in a way they can understand as well?
Yeah. If you think about the way that money has moved across the world since the last couple hundred years, it's very manual. So you used to have ships that had gold bars that sailed from England to the US or, all across the world. And you would have these marketplaces where people would come and exchange their goods and services. And there would be banks that are there because banks needed to facilitate all of these transactions and record who owns what money. Um, they made a huge innovation when they started to create these notes that said, "Hey, this person has this amount of money," and those notes were good for when you're away from the country that you normally bank in because you can have some kind of trusted source that says, yes, I am good to make this deal and buy these 10,000 cattles or this big barrels of spices and things like that. And you knew that you would get paid if you were the seller. So all of that worked really well when we had these very disconnected systems. As new technologies like the telegraph or the railroad started to come in, people were able to adapt those changes and just said, okay, we'll do the same things that we did. We'll just do them maybe a little bit faster because we can get information from point A to point B faster than we could when it was just on horseback or someone riding or on a boat. Um, Now, all of this has changed dramatically as we've looked at the growth of the internet and the different ways that people experience the internet from web browsers to mobile phones. So when you think about fintech, it's really making sure financial services and the experience of managing and moving money catches up to the technologies that we're used to in all the other things that we use technology for.
That was a great explanation, and you were talking about like ships and bringing money across in a very kind of a dated way. And I know you've worked across legacy finance, fintech, crypto. Um, how has the way we think about money changed in like the recent past? Can you talk a little bit about just how that looks like for us?
Yeah, I think it is changing constantly. And if you think about what money is at its core, today it is really just numbers in a computer. So those numbers in a computer are maintained by banks or financial institutions that keep track of how much Paul has in his account versus how much Mark has in his account versus how much Uphold Corporation has in their accounts. And all of this is basically ledgers, right? So it's just
Mhm.
books and records that say, hey, this person has this amount. Now, one of the things that has really changed is since the financial crisis, people have started to question, hey, wait a minute, how can I have more control over what is going on with the money that I have? We saw these big financial institutions collapse and there was uncertainty. People were like, wait a minute, what is the plan? How can I have more power over what is happening? And that has really gone along with the growth of the internet and mobile devices because now you have at your fingertips access to all of the information in the history of the world. And new consumer products have made it easier to manage your finances. Everything from Venmo to Robinhood have made it so that you have control over your financial information, your trading, you understand every time what the current state of your wealth is if you use those tools. So it is a lot more democratized than it used to be. You don't have to go into the bank to get your balance anymore.
That was great. And I think there were two other buzzwords I wanted to get into now so people have a just understanding of this conversation as well. Blockchain, crypto. I think when people hear those words, it can sound both familiar and abstract. Can you help explain what those are and what's kind of happening behind the scenes when we talk about things like blockchain and crypto?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So, yeah, I was mentioning there's all of these books and records or ledgers, right, that keep track of whose balance is, what people's balance are, and who owns what. If you think about it at its core, what a blockchain does is instead of saying, hey, this one financial institution, Bank of America, is the only person who really knows what your balance is, says, no, actually, through the rules of a distributed global technology system, you can actually have everyone know up to the second what the balance of any given person is based on this network. And it's through the rules of encryption and kind of cryptography that you can guarantee that that's secure. Because, of course, if you say, hey, everyone can determine what their bank balance is, of course, everyone's going to be like, oh, I have billions of dollars in my bank account. But you have rules, you have what they call consensus. So the different parts of the system have to agree, okay, this balance is accurate because it meets all of these rules. And that's basically what financial institutions like banks have been doing for hundreds of years now. It's just now instead of an individual who is accountable for it, you can have a global network that is tracking all of this. And it turns out when you have a global network that can track whether or not something is true, which is your balance in this case, you can actually use that technology for a lot of other things because now you can prove when something happened, what
Yeah.
happened around it, what caused that to happen. So you suddenly can actually have truth that is defined through unbreakable encryption that people can understand. And that has led to a proliferation of all kinds of new products. Everything from NFTs that you hear about, like, it started with, hey, there's a picture of a monkey that people thought is cool, to now actually if you have a stake in a piece of real estate, you can get an NFT that represents that. And all of a sudden, when people are paying rent to that building, you can get a fraction of it because you know, based on immutable math, that you own a piece of that. Or you can look at something like a prediction market, which are new, that says, "Hey, I made a guess that this thing was going to happen, and this was the odds of that thing happening. So I can actually put a price on that." And you can start to see how this new technology is enabling all kinds of innovative use cases now that you have this global database of truth.
Also, you answered my next question, which was kind of how are these technologies being applied? So great examples that you've shared. And as someone who works in tech but has a limited understanding of the nuances of fintech, really helpful definitions that you shared. So thank you for breaking those things down in a way we can understand. That said, as simple as you define those things, we're talking about, in truth, really robust systems, right? Um, I think as an end user, one of the things we take for granted is how simple that front end experience feels. Like the Venmos and those banking apps are so simple, and the experience of sending money is so fast. But designing those interfaces, I imagine, takes a lot of behind the scenes complexity and work, which kind of brings me to my next section here is talking about how you design for that tension. Can you talk about the unique challenges in this space and how does designing for fintech differ from designing, say, like a social or e-commerce app?
Yeah, I would say, to answer the question directly, designing for fintech should not be too different from the other apps that people use day to day. And if it is, then you're going to have a lot of trouble getting people to use those things. Now, at the core of it, yes, there is a lot of complexity and systems talking to each other. And that's not that different from any other internet connected system because you have all kinds of layers that your experience is built on. But you have a few extra things that come into play when you're talking about people's money. So,
Mhm.
first of all, you have their livelihood, the things that they're working for is tied to this. You cannot have situations where, oh, we dropped a packet, so we lost that, and you no longer have that money available. That just cannot happen. So reliability becomes incredibly important. And that's actually a real big benefit of blockchains because blockchains operate 24/7. They have a lot lower time for a transaction to be confirmed on it. So you don't have to wait for all of these checks that happen manually like you do with a traditional bank. One of the things that hits home a lot when I talk about this is if you think about the problems a business might have. So take a restaurant, for instance. Right? A restaurant does a lot of their business on the weekends, and so they're constantly getting diners come in and order things. But if you think about it, banks are closed on the weekends, and
Yeah.
money doesn't really move. That doesn't change the fact that a restaurant still needs to be able to pay their workers and order food for the next week and all of that. So what have they done? They've tried to create more complex ways to get the money sooner. They'll take out loans or they'll have borrowing agreements or they'll get kind of advances from suppliers. All this does is just make it a lot more complicated and have more people inside of the process, have more things to track. Versus if you just had something that was on a blockchain, you know immediately, okay, this person swiped their card, the balance moves from wallet A to wallet B. Wallet B then has that credit pretty much instantly. So you think about all of the now experiences that you can build on top of that, but you're hiding away all of that. Like, oh, what is the private key? How are they signing that? None of that matters to the end user. They just want to know that, okay, my money is moving and in a safe way, but it shouldn't be too different from the consumer apps that they use. You have to hide all of that.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that it's not different, but there's different kind of considerations that you take into account, and people don't mess around with their money. So less room for failure, I imagine, when you're working on these types of products. And you just said that some of these things have to be hidden. You're making this complex look very simple. Do you have any stories about, let's say, a change you made that seemed really small on the surface, but maybe completely shifted user trust or adoption, or was just a larger lift than we might seem from the front end?
Yeah, there's a lot of examples I can think of, but one of the hardest problems to solve is that people want to deposit money into a cryptocurrency exchange right away, but a bank ACH transfer in the US is not instant. It can take 3 days for it to process, and there can be all kinds of things that happen in those 3 days that cause it to fail. Maybe you entered a number incorrectly. Maybe your bank had some kind of system error and said, oh, no, wait, we can't actually deliver that money. So then a customer goes and they're like, okay, I want to actually do something with my money. And they find either it's on hold, they can't do it because the crypto exchange hasn't received the money, or in a worst case scenario, they've gotten the money, but then all of a sudden their balance goes negative because it turns out that something further upstream that they don't even know about caused it to happen. So that creates a really bad user experience, right? You're like,
Right.
oh, either I thought something was going to work a certain way and it didn't, or I thought that I was good to go, but I'm not. And it's not anything the customer did. It's not anything that the crypto company did. It's just the way that the rails work to move that
Hmm.
money. And so we have to design around this. We have to, put things like, oh, it will take X amount of time for your funding to come through. We have to make like a clock sometimes that says this is what will happen, and when you'll have access to how much. It becomes a very big user experience problem to try to make
Right.
people comfortable with the limitations of the legacy system. But it is getting better.
And I'm curious to know what role research plays in your team's process, and also if you find user behaviors differ in fintech versus other industries. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah, we do research a lot. So we tend to have a number of what I'll call implicit signals, things that we just watch within how people are using the app and the experience. Everything is measured, everything has instrumentation and analytics tied to it. So we can see how people are navigating through different screens, how long people are taking, is a person scrolling up and down? Maybe they're confused or they're looking for some other info that's not there. And then we have explicit signals that we look at. So those will be surveys, those will be after action things that pop up and say, are you satisfied with this? Or even we'll schedule calls with users and do user groups and things like that. And all of this helps us define what makes our users special and what they understand, because even though people are pretty used to using financial apps these days, most people have used Venmo or Zelle, or even Apple Pay. It's actually, there's nuances to how they expect that to work. And the signals and the data that we have and the research can help us really optimize that for our specific customers and the people like them, as opposed to a general audience who, might have very broad needs.
Amazing. As someone in product design myself, I feel like, are so many skills and processes that are transferable across industries. But hearing about the very kind of unique things that you have to take into account is really interesting to me. The challenges you have are not the challenges I have. And yet we're applying design thinking. We have the same design thinking. And so we apply it just kind of differently. So really insightful there. But I'm going to move into another kind of topic and buzzword, completely overused in tech, but one that we can't seem to escape from: innovation. Let's talk about what innovation looks like in fintech. Um, in your space, I guess innovation isn't just about speed, right? Like we were saying earlier, you can't just like break stuff because
Yeah.
that would severely be bad for users. Can you talk about what it does look like in fintech?
Yeah. I think innovation is that blend of doing something new in a way that doesn't compromise the user's current experience. So you can't just do it because it's new. It has to be 10 times better than what the user is used to. And sometimes that innovation doesn't happen on the front end because a user might already be used to making it look like money moves seamlessly. It's happening on the back end. It's upgrading banking systems, it's upgrading trading systems, it's upgrading those things that cause the current friction in order to make it more seamless. And sometimes it's not even any technology, it's just working with lawmakers and regulators to get them to approve a different way to do things. The most exciting thing is like all of these things are happening now, right? So everything from the banking partners that we're working with to update their systems to the new laws and the new regulations that people are passing across the world, it really is making a more customer friendly experience, both on the back end so that we can represent that on the front end.
I think so many people think about innovation from that front end experience and what it looks like and does it look cool. I love hearing your perspective that sometimes it is on the back end that people just don't see, but you've kind of
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
great.
I think
And
innovation in the front end is always sexy. People always like love it, right? You love to open up something and see, oh, this is clean and simple. But sometimes it's a lot harder to make it clean on the back end. And yeah, that's where fintech really has to do a really good job end to end.
yeah, everybody always wants like that sexy update, but love that. And you kind of started talking about kind of regulators and the global scale of things. I'm curious to know what it takes to scale a product across such different regions with different rules and laws, especially something like fintech. Can you talk about bringing product to scale on a global level?
Yeah, it is very interesting to see the different approaches that companies take to this. I think when something is brand new, then regulators aren't even aware of it. So you look at some of the early crypto companies, it really was just a guy who is like, hey, I happen to have this website that does something kind of similar. I'm going to use it for this. And suddenly they're doing billions of dollars worth of transactions. But no regulator is kind of looking at it. They're just kind of throwing it out there and seeing what works. Now, once something goes wrong and someone's like, "Hey, wait a minute, this company that has no licenses and we don't know who they are, we don't know what they're doing is causing potential consumer harm." That's where regulators kind of get in. Usually then they start to talk about, okay, what are the rules? How do those rules apply to this new space? And most importantly, who is the one who sets the rules for that new
Mm.
space? Sometimes it's very easy because there is a legacy system that's similar to it, right? If you have a stock trading, for instance, and something it looks like stock trading, like okay, well maybe the same people who make the rules on stocks can make the rules on this, or if it's banking, the same people who do banking can make the rules on this. But that's the first level of kind of understanding. At the same time, as these relatively slow processes are happening through governance and through panels and discussions, innovation isn't stopping, right? You have people
Yeah.
who are, doing things better, doing things differently. And what you have to do from a fintech point of view, because you can't stop and wait until you have all the answers, is you have to take the best kind of most sane approach. So understanding, hey, this is what the regulations in this space look like. Maybe they don't quite exist in this new space yet, but we can use that as a common ground. So we can say, okay, regulator in this other country, this is how you currently look at laws that prevent money laundering or that prevent terrorist financing. We can take those same concepts and apply them to this new space. And this is how we've done that. So, a big part of it is looking at what exists and trying to walk them through how you have met the spirit of that in this new form that maybe doesn't have explicit laws on it.
I love that idea of finding the common ground and how you just said you can't wait to have all the answers. I think as product designers, especially ones that are deeply seated in data and information, we want to have all the answers. We want our decisions to be informed. But you're right, we can't always stop everything we're doing to make a
Yeah.
product decision.
Yeah. I
So
like to
that
call it you take intelligent risks, right? You have to be smart about the risks that you take and then, where you do things or don't do things.
along those lines, I mean, how do you align your team around taking smart risks, right? So for me, When we take risks, it's kind of like, yeah, like let's break the system, let's try all these different things, and then we'll come back and figure out the right answer. Is that similar for you, or is it just different because obviously you can't break the thing to find the answer?
Yeah, it is not quite move fast and break things, but it is move fast and make sure that you have a sensible approach to what you are changing. And finding that line is very hard. I remember there's one time, an example that I have where we were creating a new set of limits for people who can trade on, if you have this profile, you can trade this much. If you have this profile, you can trade this other much. But what happened is we were like, oh, we need to create a bucket for people who we can't classify right now. And so we had this bucket that people who couldn't be classified fell into. And as time went on, we saw, hey, wait a minute, more and more people are falling into this bucket just because, oh, that's the exception. And they had bad limits or they had too much limits. So, when you're moving fast, you're trying to make decisions, it's probably not going to break things. But then when you start to scale and when you start to get it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, we have to go back and adjust this. And then, we can go back and fix that. And hopefully it didn't create too bad of a customer experience.
On my last podcast episode, we talked about what it takes to move the needle forward and kind of develop new experiences, etc. And we both said you have to move fast and move slow at exactly the same time, which sounds so contradictory, but we understood immediately what we were talking about in that you want to keep up with things, you want to make sure you're innovating, if you will, but at the same time, as you said, it has to be smart and sensible and grounded in something. So that really echoes, I think, what a lot of people are talking about.
Yeah.
Uh, and then still along the lines of innovation here in emerging tech, what role is like AI playing in fintech? I feel like there's so much coming out, especially with like Chat GPT. What does that look like in your world?
Yeah, I think AI is one of the most exciting technologies that has, really hit mainstream adoption and large language models in particular. So with fintech companies, actually fintech companies were big users of AI prior to the big boom in language models because they use machine learning, they used it to look at patterns and reduce risk and to make sure that everything was working as expected because you actually don't really know what users are going to do. But a credit card company is a good example of somebody who has machine learning models that will say, okay, this type of spending is allowed because it's within the profile of what that user typically does. If I suddenly go out and try to buy Gucci shoes in Nigeria, even though I just spent it at a grocery store, then the machine learning system is like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That was a early like big use case for machine learning and AI. Now with the ability of LLMs and agents to do things, what we're seeing is we can move a lot faster because you are using these tools as a force multiplier. So,
Mm.
we may have hundreds of engineers, but we could never compete with some of the bigger players who have thousands of engineers. Although we have agents now, so we can use some of the things that we would have to spend human time on, we can use agents for that. And that includes things like making sure that we're accessible in our design, making sure that we support all of the right standards in these different places. A good example in the EU, they have different cookie laws than we have in the US. But you don't necessarily want to have somebody's full-time job to like refresh every page and see is the cookie disclosure right? That's a really good job for an AI bot or an agent to do. And so it allows us to do more and allows us to do that faster.
I like the word you used, a force multiplier, being able to do what you already do, but just kind of at scale. So that's a really cool phrase and perspective I'll probably take with me from this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm going to start backing this conversation out though. So you had such a wide array of expertise, knowledge here. If you can give yourself, your younger self, some advice getting into the fintech world, what would that advice be?
Yeah. I think if my younger self had the tools that I have now, I would be unstoppable. And it's really be out there with everything that is possible. because Sam Altman says you can just do things. That is more true today than any other time. You can have an idea as a product manager. You can work through AI agents and through LLMs to create a skeleton of that idea. You can distribute that skeleton to millions of people, and you can start to build a business and a company and products around it. And the barriers to entry are so, so low
Mhm.
because all these tools are relatively low cost and relatively accessible. So my advice to my younger self is take risks, just do it, be intelligent with the risks you take, and you have all of the tools at your fingertips now to really scale in a way that wasn't possible just a few years ago.
That is really great advice that we could all use right now. Everything is moving so fast, and I think there's this new revived spirit of experimentation with kind
Mhm.
of AI moving this needle so fast that that really resonates well with me. I know we talked about a lot of things today, Paul. Before we wrap up, I do like to end with a little quick fire session. I'm going to throw out a few statements your way and just want your quick take on it. No long explanation or overthinking, gut reaction, 30 seconds or less here. Let's get into it. We
Let's
have three
go.
here. Uh, is there a fintech term you think people misuse all the time?
So, not so much a fintech term, but just a
Okay.
design term that is way overused is clean. And it's
Mm,
how can we make that experience clean? How can we make that money movement clean? I think that is something that people overuse that because there's not a lot of definition to what that actually means.
that's a good one. Moving on to a second one here. What is one thing fintech products should do better?
I think they should communicate with users a lot more about what a user can do to fix something that has gone wrong. And so it's very important. Things will go wrong. Things will always go wrong with any experience, but let a user know, hey, what can you do to make it right?
Great. And I've got one more here for you. I'm going to throw your way here. What is an innovation you think will reshape how we move money and think about money in the next decade?
Yeah, so the easy answer would be blockchains, but I think the nuanced answer is going to be tokenized deposits. So the idea that money in a bank account now can move freely on blockchains, it opens up just so many use cases and removes a lot of the barriers that exist before. Stablecoins are in that same realm, but a tokenized deposit is the true thing that unlocks that.
That sounds really interesting. That is a term I have not heard before. So definitely I'm going to look into that after this call here. Paul, really fascinating look at the world of fintech and how design can make something so complex feel so human and simple. So thank you for sharing all your insight with us today. Before we do go, we like to wrap things up with what we call our Majestic Bite. If our listeners can walk away with one thing from this conversation, what would that be?
The future of finance is getting simpler, and the infrastructure to build that is getting easier to integrate. Now that you have AI models and tools, you can think about money as maybe a solved problem and start to think about what the next thing to build on top of that. And there's always companies like Uphold who can help you integrate into those rails.
Thank you for sharing that bite. Along those lines, is there anything else you want to shout out? Anything coming up or new that you want to call out?
Yeah, Uphold's doing a lot. We always are innovating in different ways around fintech and around crypto. We're launching a debit card for US customers. They can get some pretty attractive cash back right now, and that cash back can be paid out in crypto. So it's a good way to both use your crypto in the real world, but also get some extra crypto just for doing the things you already do.
Awesome. This was such a great conversation. Thank you for breaking things down for us in the audience here. Felt really approachable, useful for everyone listening. We will link to Uphold and all these additional resources mentioned in the show notes. And I know our listeners are going to be walking away with a lot of new insights from this call. For those of you tuning in, thanks always for listening. If you found this episode helpful, give us a follow, leave a review, or share it with a friend. This is the Product Builders Podcast, and we'll see you next time.